It always begins the same way. A person sits alone at night, staring at numbers on a screen, doing everything right, following every rule they were taught about money, discipline, and hard work. Yet nothing grows. The more they push, the more life seems to push back. The harder they try, the more money slips through their fingers like water. It creates a quiet kind of suffering, the kind most people never speak about. A silent shame, a private fear. A deep suspicion that maybe the universe is rigged, that maybe abundance is reserved for the lucky, the gifted, the chosen few. But what if the truth is darker, simpler, and far more uncomfortable? What if effort alone was never meant to multiply money? What if the formula everyone was taught is incomplete, or even wrong? This is where our story begins, in the tension between desperation and possibility. In the crack where a question forces itself into existence, if effort doesn't multiply money, what does? And why does Wallace D. Wattles hint again and again that there is a silent mechanism working beneath the surface of reality, one that rewards a specific state of mind, not a specific quantity of labor? He never called it a hidden formula, yet the clues are everywhere for anyone who reads beyond the literal. The patterns are in his words, the energy is in his tone. And the results appear in the lives of those who truly understood him. The protagonist of this documentary didn't understand him at first. He was like everyone else. He worked, he obeyed, he persisted, but his life felt like a treadmill, legs moving, heart racing, but always stuck in the exact same place. Bills arrived on schedule, income fluctuated without reason, and every financial victory was followed by an unexpected setback, as if the universe kept a perfect balance of struggle. He lived in a small apartment that echoed with the weight of unspoken frustration, the kind of space where you can feel your own disappointment in the air, the kind of life where hope becomes something you don't trust anymore. He had read The Science of Getting Rich before. People online said it changed their lives. Some claimed it turned their finances around within weeks. But for him, nothing. He read the words, highlighted the sentences, repeated the affirmations, yet when he looked at his bank account, it was like nothing had changed. It made him resentful. It made him skeptical. Sometimes it made him angry. He wondered if Wallace Wattles was wrong, or if he was missing something, or if the universe simply didn't respond to people like him. This is the kind of internal conflict that slowly breaks a person from the inside, the way water breaks stone. Not all at once, but drop by drop. What he didn't know was that his problem wasn't lack of belief or lack of discipline. His problem wasn't laziness. His problem wasn't even the world outside him. His real problem was invisible, buried under years of habitual thinking, inherited fears, and unconscious patterns he didn't know he had. He was trapped in the mental frequency of survival, which produces effort but not multiplication. He didn't understand that money behaves differently depending on the consciousness behind it. He didn't know that money grows for some people because their mind creates conditions where growth is automatic, the same way fertile soil produces plants without being told how. And he certainly didn't know that Wattles left a roadmap for shifting into a state where money multiplies almost by itself. But everything changed on a night that looked no different from any other. He had returned home from a long day, exhausted, drained, and carrying a stack of unopened mail. The kind of mail you don't open because you already know what's inside. He tossed it on the table and collapsed into the chair. It was the sound of the chair creaking that pulled his attention to the bookshelf in the corner, a shelf he rarely touched anymore. The Science of Getting Rich was there, buried between tax documents and notebooks filled with half-finished ideas, abandoned goals, and reminders of who he once thought he could become. He pulled the book out, not with hope, but with frustration, as if confronting something that once promised salvation but never delivered. He flipped through the pages, irritated, scanning random lines. And then something strange happened, something subtle, barely noticeable, but enough to shift the entire trajectory of his life. A small piece of paper slipped out from the book and fell onto the floor. At first, he thought it was an old receipt, maybe a grocery list, maybe a forgotten note, but when he picked it up, he saw words written in a handwriting that wasn't his. It looked old, fragile, the ink fading. 6 words, just 6. But they struck him like lightning. Money multiplies when the mind expands. He froze. He didn't recognize the handwriting. He didn't remember placing the paper in the book. Perhaps it had been tucked inside for years. Perhaps it had been there before the book even belonged to him. He stared at the phrase, and for a moment time felt different, like the room had become still. He sat down slowly, the note pressing between his fingers, the message echoing in his chest. Money multiplies when the mind expands. What did that mean? Was it a quote from Wattles, a summary someone else had written, a forgotten annotation? It didn't matter. What mattered was that those 6 words unlocked something in him, a memory, a curiosity, an instinct he didn't know he had. He opened the book again, but this time he wasn't reading with frustration. He was reading with hunger, with focus, with a sense that he had missed something essential. And as he read, he started seeing patterns he had never noticed before. Lines he had skimmed in the past suddenly glowed with meaning. Phrases that once sounded poetic now sounded scientific, almost mathematical. Wattles wasn't talking about positive thinking. He wasn't talking about hard work. He wasn't even talking about the law of attraction the way people online described it. He was talking about a specific mental state, a shift that changes the way reality responds to you. It wasn't just about attracting money. It was about multiplying it, automatically. Predictably, consistently, like gravity, like magnetism, like a law of nature. The protagonist felt his pulse quicken, the way it does when you sense that the truth is close enough to touch. He realized something profound. He had been using the book incorrectly, not because he lacked intelligence or discipline, but because he was approaching it through a competitive mindset, the very mindset Wattles warns against. He had tried to use the book to fight lack, to escape fear, to climb out of a hole. But Wattles never intended his teachings to be used that way. You can't multiply anything while fighting for survival. You can't grow anything while focusing on what's missing. And you certainly can't create riches while thinking like someone who is afraid. As that realization washed over him, something inside him softened. He felt a mixture of grief for the years he had wasted and gratitude for the moment he was experiencing. It was painful, but it was awakening him. His whole life had been one long competition, against time, against bills, against people doing better than him. Every decision he made was tinged with urgency, every thought was poisoned by fear, and everything he did carried the vibration of lack, even when he thought he was being positive. But Wattles was clear. Fear cannot create. Competition cannot grow. Anxiety cannot multiply. Only creation multiplies. He closed the book and let his eyes drift across the room. The space felt different now, as if something invisible had shifted. He felt something opening inside him, a space he didn't know he had. A quiet awareness, a mental expansion. For the first time in his life, he understood that money doesn't multiply because you work harder. It multiplies because your consciousness becomes fertile. It multiplies because the mind stops fighting and starts creating. And in that moment of stillness, he whispered the words from the note under his breath, almost like a prayer he wasn't ready to admit he believed. Money multiplies when the mind expands. For the first time, the phrase felt real. He didn't sleep that night, not because he was anxious, but because something inside him had awakened after years of silence. It felt as if a veil had been lifted. The room was the same, the problems were the same, but his perception was no longer the same. He sat there with the book open in front of him, the small handwritten note resting on top of it, like a key that had finally found the lock it was meant to open. He reread the same pages over and over, but each time the words seemed to speak differently. They weren't instructions anymore. They were confirmations. They weren't theories. They were descriptions of something real, something that had always been happening beneath the surface of his life. He realized something painful but liberating. He had lived his entire life thinking competitively. Even when he believed he was being grateful, he was doing it from a place of fear, as if gratitude were a trick to get the universe to give him more. Even when he visualized, he did it from a place of lack, desperately trying to escape his circumstances rather than creating new ones. His entire inner world had been shaped by tension. His mind had been clenched like a fist, unable to receive anything because it couldn't let go of survival. Wattles wasn't telling people to manifest money. He was telling them to become creators, not beggars, not competitors, not fear-driven reactors, but creators. This was the first piece of the hidden formula. He could feel it. It wasn't written explicitly anywhere, yet it pulsed through every page of the book. The formula didn't start with action or discipline or routines. It started with a shift inside the mind, a shift from constriction to expansion. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he could sense it the way you can sense a storm before it arrives. Something was moving inside him. Something was changing its shape. And he knew, intuitively, that the next phase of his life would depend on whether he allowed this shift to grow. He closed the book and walked to the window. The streetlights glowed against the empty road, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement. The world outside was still, quiet, almost indifferent. Yet inside him everything was vibrating with a new tension, not the tension of fear, but the tension of possibility. He felt as if he was standing on the edge of something enormous, something vast, something he had been too blind to see before. For years he had believed life was happening to him. Now he realized life had been responding to him, responding to his mind, responding to his frequency, responding to the images he held, the emotions he nourished, and the scarcity he radiated without even realizing it. He whispered again, this time with a trembling voice, "Money multiplies when the mind expands." And as he said it, he felt a sensation move through his body, a warmth, a slight pressure in his chest, a sense of alignment he had never experienced. It wasn't excitement. It was certainty, a quiet, steady, powerful certainty that felt more real than anything he had learned in school, any financial advice he had ever received, or any motivational content he had consumed online. This wasn't about hype. This wasn't about positive thinking. This was something deeper, older, and far more precise. The next morning he woke up with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was how calm his mind was. The worries that usually crowded his thoughts like vultures circling above had become strangely quiet, not because his problems were solved, but because he was no longer reacting to them with the same mental frequency. He made coffee slowly, intentionally. He sat at the table, looking at the notebook where he normally wrote his anxieties, his budget worries, his financial breakdowns. But today, he didn't feel compelled to write any of that. Instead, he opened the notebook to a blank page and wrote a single sentence in the center. "I create, therefore I grow." He didn't know where the sentence came from, but it felt true. It felt like the beginning of something new. He spent the morning moving deliberately, almost gently. Everything he did, brushing his teeth, folding his clothes, checking his emails, was done from an unfamiliar state of ease. It wasn't laziness. It was presence, awareness, the absence of mental rush. He later understood that this is the state Wattles calls living in the certain way. Not rushing, not competing, not worrying, but knowing. The first test came sooner than expected. Around noon, his phone buzzed with a notification from his bank. His stomach dropped, assuming it was another overdraft warning. But when he opened the app, he saw something else entirely. A small refund from a company he had forgotten about, credited back to his account without explanation. It wasn't a large amount, but it felt symbolic, almost synchronistic. The universe whispering, "Stay in the frequency. Don't go back to fear." He closed his eyes and breathed. In the past, he would have dismissed the refund as luck or coincidence. But today, something in him recognized it as alignment. Not magic, not a miracle. Alignment. When the mind expands, money finds new pathways to reach you. When the mind contracts, every doorway closes. The rest of the day unfolded quietly, but with subtle signs that something had shifted. People responded to him differently. Interactions felt smoother. Ideas flowed more naturally. Even a difficult conversation with a coworker ended with unexpected solutions rather than stress. There was a softness to life, an openness he couldn't quite explain. It felt as though reality had been slightly tilted in his favor, not drastically, not dramatically, but unmistakably. That night, he sat with the book again, but this time he didn't read it like a student studying instructions. He read it like a man deciphering a coded message. He noticed details that once seemed invisible. For example, Wattles wrote that you must hold the vision of what you want with unshakable faith and purpose. But he also said that the moment you try to force the vision or worry about it, you dissolve the form you created in the substantial substance. This was the piece he had never understood. Visualizing wasn't about forcing an image into the universe. It was about becoming the version of yourself who naturally experiences that reality. He realized the reason his past visualizations failed was not because he lacked clarity, it was because he lacked detachment. Every time he visualized money, he was also visualizing fear. Fear of not receiving it, fear of making mistakes, fear of disappointing himself. He was creating the image and destroying it at the same time. He was planting the seed and then digging it up every morning to see if it had grown. No seed grows like that. No consciousness grows like that. No wealth grows like that. He closed the book, took a deep breath, and began practicing something new, silent visualization, not forcing an image, but holding it gently, like something precious, seeing it as if it were already real, feeling it without begging for it, becoming it without chasing it. And as he did this, he felt the same warmth return, the same certainty, the same expansion. The feeling wasn't intense, it wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, but unshakable. Over the next days, this practice became part of his rhythm. He didn't schedule it, he didn't ritualize it. It simply unfolded naturally whenever he entered that state of mental expansion. Sometimes while walking, sometimes while drinking water, sometimes while lying in bed. He wasn't visualizing a distant future. He was stepping into an energetic identity, a creative identity. And this identity carried a truth he had never embodied before. Money grows for me because my mind is fertile. Weeks passed, and the changes intensified. Ideas began forming in his mind, ideas that were small, practical, but undeniably valuable. Solutions to problems at work that earned him unexpected recognition. clarifications about a side project he had abandoned years ago, insights about opportunities he had overlooked. It wasn't a burst of genius, it was clarity, the kind of clarity that appears when the mind stops operating in survival mode and starts operating in creation mode. The formula was activating. Something inside him was multiplying, something invisible but undeniable. And then came the moment that would test everything he had learned, everything he had discovered, everything he was becoming. Because money multiplies when the mind expands, yes. But the old mind doesn't die quietly. It fights. It tries to pull you back. It tries to convince you that the new path is too good to be true. It tries to reattach you to fear. And fear arrived in the form of an unexpected letter, a letter that would challenge the very foundation of his new consciousness. The letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where everything seems unusually calm, almost deceptive. It was a plain envelope, nothing remarkable on the outside, except for the weight he felt in his chest when he saw it sitting among the other pieces of mail. It carried the aura of bad news, that kind of quiet bad news that doesn't scream, but whispers your name with precision. His mind tightened for a moment, just a small contraction, but enough to sense the shift. Old patterns, old fears, old reflexes waking up. He picked it up slowly, almost reluctantly, and held it in his hands before opening it. A part of him hoped it was nothing. A part of him knew it wasn't. When he finally tore the envelope and unfolded the paper inside, his stomach sank in a way he hadn't felt in months. It was a debt notice, an old account he had forgotten about, now resurfacing with accumulated fees, interest, warnings, deadlines. The kind of letter that used to destroy him emotionally. The kind that used to send him spiraling for weeks. The kind that had shaped the person he used to be. For a moment, the familiar panic rose, not violently, but slowly, like a cold wave creeping up from the inside. He felt his mind contract. He felt fear start to whisper old stories. See, nothing has changed. You're fooling yourself. This is who you are. Someone who can't get ahead. Someone the universe doesn't support. Someone whose growth is temporary, whose progress collapses the moment life gets difficult. The fear felt almost intelligent, as if it knew exactly where to press, exactly which memories to activate, exactly which wounds to reopen. He could feel the old identity returning, trying to reclaim its territory. The competitive mind, the survival mind, the fearful mind. It wanted control back. It wanted to drag him into the frequency where money doesn't multiply, where everything is struggle, where the world feels hostile and indifferent. He sat down, holding the letter, staring at the numbers that used to terrify him. For a moment, he was silent. His breath slowed. His pulse softened. And in the middle of that internal storm, he remembered something Wattles wrote. A sentence he had skipped many times without understanding its meaning. You must never allow yourself to think in any way that creates fear. He had always interpreted it as motivational advice, but now he understood the truth behind it. Fear collapses the form. Fear dissolves the vision. Fear shrinks the mind, and a mind that shrinks cannot multiply anything. He closed his eyes and placed the letter on the table. The fear was still there, but he didn't resist it. He simply observed it. He breathed through it. He let it rise and fall without giving it power. This was new. In the past, fear consumed him. Now he was watching it like a brief shadow passing over the ground. It still had shape, but it no longer had substance. Slowly, he whispered to himself, "This situation is temporary. My consciousness is permanent." And the moment he said it, a subtle shift happened inside him, a return to the expanded state, a quiet reclamation of the new identity he had been practicing. This was the exact moment where most people lose the formula. They collapse under stress. They forget the truth. They dissolve everything they created, but he refused to go back. He chose creation over fear, expansion over contraction, vision over reaction. He set the letter aside and sat in silence, allowing his mind to stretch open again. He went back to the words from the mysterious handwritten note. Money multiplies when the mind expands. And so he expanded. He breathed deeply. He felt the fear loosen. He felt the tension dissolve. He felt his awareness rise above the numbers, above the debt, above the temporary problem. And in that elevated state, something remarkable happened. Something that would not have been possible in the old mindset. He saw the solution. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't miraculous. It was clear, clean, obvious. The kind of solution you can only see when your consciousness is not drowning in fear. He realized that he had an unpaid invoice from freelance work he had done months earlier. He had forgotten to send the final billing. The amount wasn't enormous, but it covered more than half of the debt. The rest could be handled with a simple restructuring of his next paycheck. It was manageable. It was solvable. And it had always been solvable. He simply couldn't see it when his mind was contracted. This was the moment he finally understood what Wattles meant by acting in the certain way. It wasn't about rushing. It wasn't about chasing. It wasn't even about being perfect. It was about holding the mind steady, steady enough for clarity to emerge, for intuition to guide action, for solutions to materialize effortlessly. He realized something else. Money doesn't multiply only through external sources. It multiplies through ideas, through clarity, through solutions, through mental expansion. Money is not the cause, money is the result. He laughed softly, almost in disbelief, as he picked up his phone and sent the overdue invoice. Within minutes, he received a reply confirming the payment would be processed within 24 hours. Relief washed over him, but not the old kind of relief, not the desperate kind. This relief was grounded, confident, aligned. He wasn't escaping a problem, he was stepping into mastery. That night, the visualization practice deepened. He didn't picture money anymore. He pictured himself as someone for whom money grows effortlessly, someone who is stable, calm, creative, generous, someone whose presence alone is a magnet for opportunities. Wattles taught that you must hold the vision of the person you intend to become, not the thing you intend to acquire. And for the first time, he did exactly that. The identity began to anchor itself inside him. He could feel it shaping his emotions, refining his thoughts, altering the way he perceived the world. He felt a quiet strength developing, a sense of inner authority, not arrogance, but certainty, not ego, but alignment. This was the state where multiplication begins, not because of magic, not because of luck, but because a person in this state makes different decisions, sees different paths, attracts different people, notices different opportunities, and behaves in ways that create compound results. Weeks later, something extraordinary happened. The moment that proved the formula was real. It wasn't dramatic like the movies, but it was life-changing. It started with a simple conversation at work. A colleague mentioned a new project, something that needed leadership, clarity, and creative direction. Normally he would have stayed quiet, convinced he didn't have enough experience, afraid to look foolish, but now he spoke up. Not confidently, not aggressively, but calmly, with the certainty of someone who knows his mind is fertile. The team accepted his input. Then they asked for more. Then they asked him to take the lead. What followed was a series of decisions he could not have made months earlier. Decisions that led to visible improvement in the project, recognition from management, trust from colleagues, and eventually, an unexpected offer. A promotion. A raise. and a bonus, all within weeks. It wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence, it was multiplication, unfolding naturally, silently, inevitably. The old him would have dismissed it. The new him knew it was the formula in action. But something even more surprising happened afterward. The moment he received the raise, instead of feeling excitement, he felt gratitude. Pure, deep, luminous gratitude. Not for the money, but for the shift, the transformation, the expansion. He realized the reward wasn't the raise. The reward was the new consciousness. Because with that consciousness, the raise was only the beginning, but the universe wasn't done yet. There was one more test he needed to face, the test that would determine whether the multiplication would continue or collapse. The test that every person encounters on this path. A test disguised not as a problem, but as a choice between the old identity and the creator he was becoming. The choice appeared in the most ordinary way, not as a crisis, not as a setback, but as an opportunity so simple it almost went unnoticed. It arrived one morning, as he checked his email before leaving for work. Amid the usual messages, updates, and automated notifications, he found an invitation from a friend he hadn't spoken to in years. The friend was launching a small project, nothing big, nothing glamorous, nothing that screamed wealth. It was a quiet offer to collaborate, to bring creative insight, to help with something that had potential but no guarantees. The old version of him would have rejected it instantly. Too risky. Too uncertain, too time-consuming, too unfamiliar. The survival mind hates anything that doesn't promise immediate safety. But the new version of him, the version shaped by expansion, faith, gratitude, and vision, felt something stir, something warm, something intuitive. Not excitement, but recognition. He sensed that this was not about the project itself. It was about alignment, about responding to the world from a creative state rather than a fearful one. He stared at the email for several minutes. The longer he looked at it, the more he understood that this moment was a fork in the road. Not because the project guaranteed money, but because it required the identity he had been building. It required the certain way. It required him to act from abundance, not survival. It required him to believe in himself before having proof. Wattles wrote that you must act now upon the people and circumstances in your present environment. He used to interpret that as productivity advice, but now he understood. Acting in the certain way means stepping into opportunities that resonate with your expanded identity, even when you cannot see the entire path. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and asked himself a single question. Which choice expands me? The answer was immediate. He replied to the email with a simple message. I'm in. Let's talk. The moment he hit send, he felt the same quiet certainty that had been guiding him for months. Not adrenaline, not fear, certainty. As if the universe had been waiting for this exact decision, holding its breath until he took the step that aligned with the person he was becoming. That afternoon, things began to accelerate. During the meeting with his friend, he found himself speaking with a clarity he didn't recognize. Ideas flowing effortlessly, insights connecting like threads forming a pattern, solutions emerging from a place he couldn't intellectualize. His friend listened, impressed, sometimes even speechless. At the end of the meeting, the friend said something that would stay with him forever. I don't know what changed in you, but whatever it is, it's powerful. He didn't answer, but inside he knew. It wasn't luck, it wasn't timing, it wasn't skill, it was expansion. The mind that had once been a battlefield of fear had become a field of creation, a place where ideas could multiply, where clarity could multiply, where opportunities could multiply, and where money, inevitably, would multiply too. Not because he chased it, but because he had become the kind of person who naturally generates it. Over the next weeks, the project began to grow. Small at first, then steadily, then surprisingly. Every time he acted from the creative state, not rushing, not doubting, not competing, things moved faster. People responded differently. Resources appeared, solutions emerged, doors opened. It felt as if the universe were rearranging itself around his new consciousness, and in a way, it was. Because a person who operates in the certain way becomes a gravitational force, and everything that matches their frequency begins to orbit around them. Then came the moment that confirmed beyond all doubt that Wattles's formula was real. It was late at night when he received the message. His friend had run the projections, done the calculations, and wanted to share the results. The collaboration, the simple offer he almost ignored, had turned into a revenue stream far bigger than anything he had imagined. Not millions, not overnight wealth, but something far more meaningful. Evidence. Evidence that his new identity was working. Evidence that the formula wasn't philosophy, it was law. Evidence that expansion multiplies money automatically, consistently, quietly. He sat there staring at the message, feeling something rise in his chest, something soft and overwhelming. Gratitude. Pure gratitude. Gratitude for the struggle that shaped him. Gratitude for the note that awakened him. Gratitude for the book that guided him. Gratitude for every moment of fear he had survived long enough to outgrow. Gratitude for the realization that wealth had never been outside of him. It had always been waiting inside his consciousness, trapped beneath layers of doubt, waiting for the day he expanded enough to release it. He closed his eyes and visualized again, but this time it wasn't about money or success or achievement. He visualized himself as a conduit, a channel through which ideas, value, opportunities, and wealth could flow naturally. He felt connected to something bigger, something deeper, something that Wattles described but never fully explained, the source of all. The creative principle, the substantial substance, not a distant force, but something inside him, breathing with him, expanding with him. In that moment, he understood the final piece of the formula, the one that most people never discover. Money multiplies automatically, not because you force it and not because you chase it, but because you align with the version of yourself who already lives in abundance. The multiplication is a side effect, a symptom, a natural consequence of an expanded mind. He whispered again, for the last time, the words that had changed everything. Money multiplies when the mind expands. But this time, the phrase wasn't a reminder, it was a confirmation, a truth he had embodied. From that night on, life began unfolding differently, not perfectly, but powerfully. The expansion continued, the clarity deepened, the opportunities multiplied, and the money kept following the growth of his consciousness, rising quietly, steadily, naturally, as if pulled by an invisible current he no longer questioned. He finally understood that wealth is not something you earn. Wealth is something you become, and the formula had been hidden in plain sight all along. The certain way, the creative state, the expanded mind, the alignment with the source, the vision held without fear, the gratitude that amplifies everything. He realized he would never go back to the old version of himself, because once you expand, once you touch this consciousness, once you witness the multiplication with your own eyes, returning to the survival mindset becomes impossible. The old identity dies. The new one becomes permanent, and from that moment on, wealth is not a pursuit. It is a natural condition. And now, as you listen to this story, the question passes to you. The formula is not mine. The formula is not his. The formula is available to anyone who chooses to expand. The real question is, will you contract into fear, or will you expand into abundance? Because the moment you choose expansion, the multiplication begins. If this message resonated with you, if something inside you shifted even a little, take a moment now to breathe deeply and claim the identity you want to become. And if you feel called, support this channel so we can continue spreading the teachings of Wallace D. Wattles. Leave a comment sharing the moment in this video that hit your soul the hardest. Subscribe so you don't miss the next message that might change everything. And if you want to contribute to this mission, you can buy us a coffee. Your support helps keep this work alive and reaching more people every day. The certain way is real. The formula is real. And abundance begins, always, with the expansion of your mind.